Greetings, Tentacle Arms, and welcome to Codex Compliant.
We haven't done a model retrospective in a hot minute, so let's do something about that.
Traitor Marines, Heretic Astartes, Spiky Boys, or just simply Chaos Space Marines. Those Astartes who have turned away from the grimdark of the Imperium of Man to serve the slightly different grimdark of the Chaos Gods have been around for nearly as long as Warhammer 40,000 has been a thing. Although they were not present in the first edition rulebook from 1987, they did start to appear the following year and have been around ever since.
As you would imagine, over that time the models have undergone one or two changes, so we thought we'd take a look at how they've developed. Like we did with our similar video on Imperial Space Marine models, we'll be focusing this video on the basic troops, your standard Chaos Marine. This is because A, the full model line for over 30 years would take far too long to cover and we just want to give you an overview, and B, through the basic troops you can get a good feel on the design principles at play at any given time. So when we don't mention, like, Helldrakes or the Khorne Berserker models with their leggy out, don't worry, we know they exist.
So, to paraphrase noted poet and philosopher Drake Mallard, let's get traitorous.
That joke is so bad!
I know! It's great!
The very first Chaos Space Marine model can be found in White Dwarf 100 from April of 1988. Hidden amongst these loyalist marines, and I know your attention is drawn by the Mantis Warrior with 2 power fists, but try and stay with me here. Hidden amongst them is a marine not only with a Chaos Star on his shoulder, but one that looks almost like a precursor to a Plague Marine. In fact, it would be later absorbed into the Chaos Space Marine range, showing it as a true follower of Chaos. Although by then it would be sold with a regular Chaos Marine backpack rather than the metal Imperial Space Marine one it's shown with here. Something you can see on the example one in the Warhammer World cabinet for old school 40k minis. The model was sculpted by either Mark Copplestone or Ali Morrison, not entirely sure which, but we're big fans of his chainsaw bayonet. Since this little guy was hiding in plain sight, we feel comfortable in saying that this is not only the first instance of a Chaos Space Marine, but also the first instance of an Alpha Legionnaire. No, stop clicking off the video to check Lexicon and to prove us wrong, just let us have this one. A month later, we got our first proper 100% not even slightly hidden Chaos Space Marine in the form of the LE-101 Chaos Renegade, also sometimes referred to as Treacher Marine or Tentacle Arm. Treacher, for those unaware, is a word that they sometimes use for Chaos Space Marines back in this era. It's just an old word that means traitor or someone who's deceitful. It's derived from the same place as words like treachery. This has been Wib's Word Corner.
Anyway, old Tentacle Arm was teased in artwork form on the cover of White Dwarf issue 99, before the model itself appeared in issue 101. It was sculpted by Michael Perry, and we should mention that neither of us painted this one. This is just how we got him, and the paint job was too era appropriate to change. As you can see, it's quite distinctly different to Imperial Space Marines of the same time period. Lacking a beaked helmet with the armour and war gear feeling more ornate and somewhat biomechanical. Also quite noticeably having an absolutely huge backpack. Seriously, these old Chaos backpacks are much bigger than the ones on modern Chaos Marines. Something accentuated by the fact that the mini itself is pretty small, much like most of the minis from this time period. Although there does seem to be 2 versions of the backpack sculpt from around this time, and the other one seems to be a little smaller. He also has one of the big aesthetic features of Chaos Marines, a horned helmet. They're not present on every Chaos Space Marine model, but we'll be seeing a lot more of these in this video. Shortly afterwards, we got another Chaos Marine in the LE-102 Traitor Legionnaire, later also known as Three Eyes. Actually, if we're really getting into it with the alternate names, then both LE-101 and LE-102 showed up as Citadel combat cards where they were called Tyrell of Arden and Brother Nightshade, respectively. Anyway, the design of the 102 is less mutated than the 101, but is similar in that uniformly ununiform way that Chaos often are. He also had quite a fun description. Once proud servants of humanity, now among its deadliest enemies, they haunt the Eye of Terror, screaming cacophonic praises to chaos, gurgling unutterable horrors to a deaf universe, designed by Michael Perry.
Now, despite the LE in the names of the previous models standing for limited edition, they both became part of the standard Chaos line when it came out in conjunction with Realm of Chaos Slaves to Darkness around August of 1988. That line is a lot of fun to look through since they just really went wild with the designs. Big fan of Horsehead Guy and Dogboy personally. At this point, it feels like they were just throwing absolutely everything out there and seeing what would stick. Over time, this line was expanded with stuff like the Heavy Weapons Renegades, who had some novel and unique versions of weapons, Marines able to ride various existing chaotic mounts like Juggernaut's steeds and particularly angry horses, Chaos Terminators, whose only real change over the next 30 years would be to get progressively bigger and spikier, and the first iteration of Chaos Dreadnoughts that are super weird and great. They have this little tail stinger thing around the back, but a lot of people tend to build them with the pokey bit out front, which is, interesting.
He means that it looks like a pig!
But yeah, in short, this is the first iteration of the Chaos Space Marine line. It's quirky and all over the place, just like their Imperial cousins, but it gave a solid foundation to work from.
Next up on our magical mystery tour, we stop off at 1990, and everyone's favourite game of shooting people in corridors that isn't Space Hulk.
Space Crusade.
Yeah, we're talking about Space Crusade again. Beautiful, beautiful Space Crusade. There were 3 new Chaos models in the game, a Chaos Marine Commander, which we don't have, a standard Chaos Marine, of which you get 4, and a Chaos Dreadnought. The Marines are like the other Space Marines from Space Crusade, being chunkier than their mainline 40k counterparts, wholly plastic with exchangeable weapons, and rocking the classic monopose... pose. Their backpack design appears to be based on the less big version of the Rogue Trader backpack, for those of you who are interested in relative backpack sizes. So when combined with their overall bulkier aesthetic, they look a lot more in line proportionally than some of the earlier ones. The regular Chaos Marine model is, in our opinion, just a really solid design. Sure, it's a bit more cartoony than most, but it just kind of works, you know? Also, I know that Dreadnoughts aren't the focus here,
Dreadnought!
But the one from Space Crusade is super interesting since it's a design that wouldn't be seen in this scale again. Sure, there was another bigger version of it with far too many guns in one of the Space Crusade expansions, but the only other game that used this design was Epic, and those were tiny and adorable, and I would die for them. Please ask me to die for them.
The next big change for the Chaos Space Marine line came in 1996, with the range getting a major redesign during 2nd edition. As an example, here's one of many metal Chaos Space Marines that were put out, using plastic backpacks and arms, not unlike the earlier 90s Jez Goodwin Space Marines. This one's painted as a Renegade Imperial Fist. I was on a Dornian Heresy kick at the time. Don't worry about it, it's fine. The biomechanical nature of the earlier versions had mostly disappeared and replaced with a more regular Marines but 90s goth kind of thing, and they gained a much more consistent look across the range. Some were put out with dedicated special weapons moulded onto them, but many were just bodies that you could strap arms and weapons to however you liked. Around the same time as the Metal Chaos Marines, a set of plastic ones were also released. The sculpts were pretty basic and, broadly speaking, went together like most multi-part Marines have done, except the torso and head were one piece, so you couldn't really change which way they were looking without some very careful cutting and presumably a lot of swearing. I'm also pretty sure that a box of these was the first 40k kit I ever bought, so that's a thing.
After that, the next time we'd get more basic Chaos Space Marine models was well into 3rd edition when, in 2002, a vastly improved multi-part plastic kit came out. This kit was pretty great and entirely interchangeable with the 1998 Imperial Space Marine kit, mostly since parts of it were literally modified versions of the 1998 Imperial Space Marine kit. Design-wise, it was a refinement on what had come before, largely staying away from the more organic-looking armour of Rogue Trader so it wouldn't look too out of place in any Chaos Legion, intentionally trying to maintain a Chaos Undivided look. But it also came with a sprue of mutated parts should you want to go down that route, and could be easily assembled in many different ways. The mutation sprue also had this face on it, and that's a pretty blatant reference to John Carpenter's The Thing, a movie that is, controversially, quite good. There's actually a very interesting article in White Dwarf 266 about the design process for this kit. Although the project was led by Jez Goodwin and based on art he did in 1995, the sculpting was actually done by the Trainee Miniatures team. And the article actually goes into who did what, which is just really neat. So we know that Juan Diaz did weapons and shoulder pads, Alex Headstorm did helmets and accessories, Mark Harrison did the torsos and legs along with some other weapons, and Mark Bedford did the mutations. It also lets us in on some info, like those mutations were explicitly designed to be also usable on the Fantasy Chaos Warrior models of the time, and that the general aesthetic they were basing them around was that of the old Chaos Terminators, since they considered those to be the models that best represented the archetypical Chaos Marine look.
At some point during 4th edition, a set of 3 monopose Chaos Marines came out. They used the same basic design as the 3rd ed sculpts, but simplified in both detail and construction. It was the sort of box that was good for adding a couple of bodies to a unit or testing out a paint scheme, but you're unlikely to make a full squad out of them. After that, there was a bit of a drought of models. Sure, individual kits would come out for the line, but the regular basic Chaos Marine would remain unchanged until 2019, aside from some additions to the sprue to give them more options and a few upgrade kits they put out over the years. Well, okay, that's not entirely true, because despite the main kit not changing much for 17 years, the direction it would eventually go had been obvious for a while. The first signs are in the 2011 video game Space Marine. The Chaos Marines in this were sleeker than the ones we'd previously seen. This was presumably due to the nature of the medium. In video games you have to worry about things like, how often do you think that horn will clip through that shoulder pad? Something that static miniatures don't have to concern themselves with as much. But regardless of whether it was planned or purely out of necessity, it did give us a bit of a glimpse of what was to come. In 2012, the 6th edition of Warhammer 40,000 was released. Don't worry if you don't remember it, it was only around for 2 years, most have tried to forget. Anyway, the box set for 6th and 7th edition for that matter was Dark Vengeance. It featured models for the Dark Angels as well as a host of new Chaos Space Marines. These new models looked great, incorporating mutations, altered versions of Mark IV armour, and just overall having a lot of character. There's just lots of little touches to how the armour is shaped that differentiate it from their loyalist brethren. As this aesthetic slowly rolled out over the Chaos Space Marine model line, it really helped them look more distinct, since previously they could look a little just Space Marines but with spikes. And this isn't just us saying that. According to GW's Phil Kelly in an article in October 2012's White Dwarf.
Up until this point, the Chaos Space Marines were a little restrained. They were evil Space Marines with spikes on their heads. We wanted them to be so much more than that. More twisted, more evil, more sinister, creepier, and more powerful.
They were apparently heavily inspired by the art from the Realm of Chaos books, and looking at Jez Goodwin's concept art for some of the models released around that time, you can really see that. They're leaning into the armour and its user being fused in some way, just like the models and art did back in Rogue Trader. However, those Dark Vengeance Marines technically weren't basic Chaos Space Marines. They were Chaos Chosen, which if you're not familiar are basically veteran Chaos Marines, so if you wanted a regular squad of Chaos Marines then you still had to use the old sculpts. Another 6 years later, in 2018, and a pair of new Chaos Space Marine models ended up in the spin-off game Blackstone Fortress. Well, okay, they were actually just one sculpt, but with 2 different heads. And this led people to wonder, does this mean some new Chaos Marines are on the way? The answer, as you future space people living in 2021 and beyond know, was yes.
2019 saw the release of the Shadow Spear box, unveiling not only the Vanguard Primaris Space Marines, but kicking off a whole new set of Chaos Minis. In it, there was a whole new set of regular, honest-to-gods Chaos Space Marines, like this one here. Standing a smidge taller than previous ones, they took the aesthetics from the Dark Vengeance Chosen and just toned it back a bit for these less veteran Marines, foregoing the more overt mutations but retaining the more organic lines that make them distinct from their Imperial counterparts. Although the Shadow Spear ones were all monopose, there would shortly afterwards be a full multi-part Chaos Space Marine kit with the same general look, just with more options and more easily customizable. Although since the legs and torsos only really go together one way, they're less interchangeable with other Space Marine kits than the previous iteration, sadly.
And that brings us up to the present day, with a Chaos Space Marine line that is in a nice place, even if a few models in it are a little old by now. Seriously, the bikes are over 20 years old at this point, and let's not even talk about the Berserkers. However, one of the nice things about the Chaos models over the years is that each iteration has had its charms. Whether it be the goofy weirdness of the Rogue Trader sculpts, the extreme levels of customization of the 3rd edition kit, or the overall quality of the 8th edition sculpts that have them looking, in our opinion, and nostalgia aside, the best they've ever looked.
I'm sure we'll have probably missed a model in there somewhere, we usually do, but this was just supposed to be a broad overview. Plus, now we've owned up to the fact that we might have missed something, you, legally speaking, can't get mad at us.
Checkmate, Internet.
Good night. dreadnought!